That was fast. Okay, we are live. All right, YouTube, AAA here with my once again returning guest Duff. Last week was a crazy week, but we are back here to talk about all the fun stuff. As you saw the title, apparently there was another shooting in Florida, and we're here to talk about some of that stuff and more. So to get the I guess disappointing news out of the way, unless you've been living under a rock, you've heard about the Florida shooting in the, correct me if I'm wrong, Duff, Parkland High School. Is that the right name of
Yeah,
it?
Parkland High School, located in was it Coral Springs?
That sounds right, but I could be wrong. It's yeah.
Oh no, I have a correction here. So, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. So, Duff, I'll let you take on this. I know that there was so basically, as far as I know, and I'll just go off and then you can chime in. There was a uh, questionable individual in the high school that was who authorities were warned about several times. Nothing was done, as far as I understand, and he went on a shooting spree, killed, I want to say 17, injured a few dozen more, or something in those lines, and now the media is just yelling guns, take them away, all that fun stuff. So once again, we have the whole rendition of here's what we must do, and if you don't agree with me, then you're a cold, hard person, and you should, and stuff. So, this is terrible. This is awful, obviously, and hopefully we can fix events in the future. But obviously, just yelling take things away instantly and agree with me is not going to work. But uh, we haven't gotten all the facts yet, or at least as far as we know right now. So hopefully we can get all the facts in and make appropriate decisions. But it definitely does not start with taking the guns away. So more knowledge is better. But anyway, Duff, your thoughts?
Yeah, this is one of those stories which is catching a lot of international attention, just because of the strong feelings on both sides. So the shooting which took place, the more we find out about the backstory, the more we see that there was a failure in communication between government law enforcement agencies, and that essentially a mental health problem was allowed to go on for far too long, when really the individual in question probably should have been admitted to some sort of recovery or treatment program, or just committed in general. But it didn't get reported. And the more we hear about what the shooter was up to prior to the shooting, the more we go, okay, Florida seems to have a lot of problems at many different levels of government, but their biggest problem seems to be in terms of providing public welfare. And then you get to the aftermath of the shooting itself, and the big story to come out this week, other than the CNN roundtable, was that officers from the, what was it called, Broward County Sheriff's Department, were on the scene and not engaging or not going into the school. I actually had a discussion with someone over on Roaming Millennials, what is it, Discord, about this, saying like, why is it surprising that the police wouldn't go in? Isn't it usually considered best practice for the police to wait for SWAT to show up? And what he told me is that actually the laws have been changed as such that police, if they are in sufficient numbers, are supposed to go into schools to try and prevent shootings from taking place or to minimize damage prior to the SWAT team arriving. So it would appear that the Broward County Sheriff's Office failed the community on several levels too, because there was the security officer of the school who was there who did not go in, and then 4 officers showed up and the 5 of them didn't go in. And it wasn't until another police department showed up that actions were taken. So any chance at minimizing casualties was lost, with the initial police department not deciding to take action. What are your thoughts there, AAA?
Well, this is the first I'm hearing of that. I didn't realize it was that uh, crazy. Wow, that's awful that they had to wait, and that was the procedure. And I mean, well, so I guess prior to this, I had heard from another podcast I listened to that there was a, I want to say it was a football coach or some kind of coach that actually gave his life saving a few kids, which is awesome. And, to, what a great American hero. And that's amazing to have someone defend, to the death. But to hear about police officers either in some whatever capacity not being able to protect the citizens, which is kind of the thing that they are paid to do, that's just wrong, and I don't understand. It sounds like since the guns and stuff or the regulations towards are not going quote unquote someone's way, we're going to try and change the laws to make someone else up higher feel better. Just sounds stupid. I mean, if you're going to have a police officer or multiple there, then they should be helping in some capacity. Maybe not necessarily, uh, being right up against the shooter. Maybe not, even though that's kind of the point of what they're there for. But at the very least, getting people out, being a kind of distraction, something. But it sounds like, so. I guess there were five officers. There were five officers, and then they intervened. Is that what you're saying, Duff?
Well, no, they didn't. It wasn't until another group of police officers from a different police force showed up that they actually decided to go in and try and prevent what was going on. And so this is what's frustrating people is this information is coming out now. However, it would appear that the chief of that police department has known what happened for at least 2 weeks' time, and he went on to the roundtable held up by CNN and essentially tried to shellac Mark Rubio, and I think Dana Lash is the representative from
Yes.
the NRA who was there, for their wrongdoings when he himself and his department appear to have exacerbated the incident and in fact allowed it to happen to a certain degree. So there's a lot of hurt feelings and a lot of blame to be thrown around. But when it comes to that initial officer not going in, the sort of sub story coming out of that is that the position of basically security guard or police sanctioned school officer is a position which is generally given to older officers who may not be fit for field duty. So the initial policeman on the scene probably wasn't in the best shape to go running in anyways. And on top of that, the officers who showed up after the fact, decided not to go in. And that leads me to question their escalation tactics because it's like, okay, if you hear a high powered rifle going off quite consistently, that's pretty intimidating. And if you only have handguns, I can see how you might balk at that, especially given if the student knows the layout of the school. So you don't necessarily want to be running down any long corridors at someone with a semi-automatic rifle. But you would figure that within their police cars, they should have multiple forms of weapons themselves. So the escalation procedure probably should have been the four police officers show up, they join the fifth guy tells them what's going on, they go back to their cars and they get out their semi-automatic weaponry and potentially a light flak jacket or something, and then go in, as opposed to just waiting and not doing anything. So we really have to question the officers involved, how they have been trained to handle things like this, and whether or not their police chief was willing to give them the go-ahead or the dispatch was willing to give them the go-ahead. So there's just a lot of things here that could have been done a lot better and potentially have saved a lot of people's lives. And this is what the right is trying to promote. Let's look at all the failures of government infrastructure here, as opposed to many people on the left who are saying, well, let's just take away all the guns. And a lot of the victims of this particular crime have been very strong advocates of that position. In fact, have gone on television and said these things. And I know that, in fact, has gotten Ben Shapiro in a lot of trouble because he said, just because you are the victim of something does not make you an expert on how to deal with it. And we have to stop the media from essentially getting these kids to stand on soapboxes, and in doing so, preventing any real discussion or any real coming together to sit down to talk about how we could have improved this situation and how we can prevent it from happening again.
Yeah, I've seen a few of those interviews, speeches by kids saying, "Hey, President Trump, blah blah blah, you're not doing anything to help me out. This could have been, there's a way to solve this. Take away the guns, do something. You're the president. I'm ashamed that you've sat in your butt and have done nothing." So yeah, I mean, kind of. You mentioned Mr. Shapiro, kind of like his deal with trying to promulgate the. I guess this goes back to the Jimmy Kimmel bringing out his son with the healthcare debate, saying, "Hey, here's my kid. Here's healthcare. Here's how it works. Oh, you're awful for not doing things my way. Look at my child. He's so adorable. He could help. If you say you're against this, then you hate kids. What's wrong with you?" And same with the shooting stuff. So it's all pretty gross, and hopefully the well, I guess I'm not sure if there's I don't know, how do you fight the emotional aspect of take away guns, and then I'm assuming there's some people on the other side too that were in the or know people that were involved in the shooting that say, hey, if a gun had been here, maybe it wouldn't have been so bad. So it's just I don't know. I wonder if there is I
Well,
guess.
actually, yeah, there has been. So one of the people, one of the kids who was a survivor of the shooting, who was present at the town hall, claims that he wasn't allowed to speak because his questions weren't actually anti-gun, and so CNN didn't allow him to be part of the roundtable, even though they had brought him there to do so. But what I think this reflects more is just how much some aspects of the media want to go after the president on everything. Because in reality, when it comes to the distribution of powers, this is very much something which is contained within Florida state. And the Florida state governor should be the one who's catching all sorts of flack. And one thing I'd point to with this is if we go over to the NRA's website and we actually ask the NRA what things are in place with regards to regulating guns and gun ownership, they state that in Florida, you don't need a permit to purchase shotguns or handguns. You don't need a permit, or you don't need to register your firearms. You don't need to license as an owner. You only need a permit in order to carry handguns. And the NRA is critical of Florida for this because it's not good gun behavior. It's not good gun policy. Now, I've talked with other people about whether or not they feel that guns should be registered. And it's like, well, that can be its own problem. Even here in Canada, we tried to have a firearms registry and it ended up being so bad and so costly that we scrapped it. But actually putting limitations on the licensing of gun ownership, I think is a necessary and good thing, particularly around mental health. So I was talking with some other guys and saying, like, what would Americans who are pro-gun say to the idea that every 5 years you need to go in, essentially get a doctor's note that says you're of sound mind, sound body, and that you have taken a refresher course on how to maintain your firearms. You go in and you renew your license and you're good for another 5 or you're good for another 10 years. And they're like, yeah, we'd totally do that. In fact, most states kind of do. And that just reveals once again how poorly Florida has been policing, but also implementing ways to ensure good gun ownership and also preventing firearms from being in the hands of people with mental health issues. But what are your thoughts, Triple A?
Yeah, I don't think the well, I mean, I'm glad you said that because that explains a lot with CNN about not being able to hear someone speak out, and it's just really getting to be a nuisance to hear all of the posturing of this is the right way to do things and other kind of things. You've actually reminded me of, since you mentioned the CNN spiel, I just watched recently Steven Crowder minute rant about all the gun myths and debunking them and all that kind of stuff, and it's just really getting annoying, and hopefully maybe we're seeing people kind of coming around and saying we need to have some decent talk and not just this blame somebody, because I would imagine that eventually people realize that you can blame some things, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a change. So sitting down and talking about stuff is good. And I haven't seen any polls or any indications of the U.S. thinks this way or leans this way towards gun safety and blah blah blah. And I have heard a lot of things about people in the White House saying, "Oh, we should just take away the Second Amendment," and of course that would never work, but I guess they could try and fail miserably. Yeah, I just don't. Uh, it's just really terrible to see. This could have been prevented. There are so many signs that it could have been prevented, and I don't know. Like we said before, this was reported by several individuals at the high school or at the high school and even not at the high school to um, the police and the FBI, and they did nothing about it, which I still am not sure why nothing was done, or very little, if anything, was done to mitigate at all what was going to happen. But I guess the good news is hopefully, like the other shootings, I mean, we can go and uh, they can complain about it, but usually they're not organized enough to actually make legislation pass through. So there's that. But I there is well, actually, I guess so. There's is the being not from the U.S. There, Duff is is there a similar or I guess are the is there a Second Amendment I guess ish for Canada or not really?
No, not at all. So in Canada, firearm ownership is a privilege which is extended to you by the government. It is not a right that is enshrined in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And I'm totally okay with that. But it also boils down to a very different mindset about our relationship with the government. In the United States, there seems to be a antagonistic relationship between the people and their governing bodies. And I would say a lot of that partially has to do with the kind of paradoxical being of not wanting the government to be too powerful. But if you look at individual counties and individual, like townships and stuff like that, you guys have so many layers of overlapping laws that are literally contradictory to one another that you as a Canadian, I'd be like, well, couldn't you just at the local level, the municipal level, the provincial level, or the state level, and the federal level, just clean it up a bit so that everybody's on the same page in terms of how things work, how different levels of government regulate different parts of the country or different activities that are requiring government intervention or government oversight. And when you say that, though, a lot of Americans will say no, because we don't want the government to have that kind of information about us, and we want to be able to settle things for ourselves. And it's like, well, this leads to the opportunities to have massive amounts of miscommunication between different levels of government, like we saw in the Florida shooting. So there's got to be a happy middle where people can say, in America, we have the Second Amendment, and it means that we can have guns. And there are arguments on both sides as to what the Second Amendment was supposed to mean, because, of course, people will say, like, they didn't actually think about automatic weapons when the Second Amendment was written. It's like, well, but the thing is, even now, they don't think about automatic weapons when they're talking about the Second Amendment, because automatic weapons have been banned in the United States for so long that they're not even really a thing. Yet at the same time, the Second Amendment seems to be of the opinion that the government is opposed to the people and opposed to freedom. Therefore, if you arm the people, it keeps the government on the straight and narrow more so than if they weren't. Because if they ever tried to do something that would, let's say, remove the Second Amendment or any of the other amendments which people are really behind, the American people could rise up and overthrow the government, or at least force the government back to the negotiation table because of the fact that they could go into the streets with guns. So it's a very different thing, because for Americans, it's very much part of your cultural history. For Canadians, it's a very different thing because we've never had quite the distrust of government that you guys have.
Yeah, I think definitely a healthy mistrust. I definitely think. Actually, this is the first time it's crazy to say, but I've not heard much about the not heard much about the overlapping, inconsistent, and contradictory rules and regulations we have. But I do know we are crazy, crazy, crazy over-regulated. That does not surprise me at all. I agree. I think there should be some kind of uh, baseline and then add on to that. But I mean, that's just, I guess this is kind of the fear of the founding fathers, right? It was we need to go and make sure the government is not bigger than the people and doesn't overshadow the country. And right now it is. And I know Trump is doing a few things to fix that, whether you like him or not, he's done some stuff to cut down on the regulations, but of course, more needs to be done. And the honest conversation needs to happen, which I think is doing better. But yeah, I think this is a tragic event, and it's awful for everyone involved. And the hardest thing to do is going to be to, as you put it, as Ben said, to get people who know about the issue to sit down and say, "Hey, here's what happened. Here's what we know. How can we make sure this never happens again?" Getting to that point was going to be really hard to do, no matter what. And unfortunately, it looks like this same tragic event could happen again before we really kind of, hey, let's put our egos aside, sit down, and actually make legislation or laws that will at least mitigate the problem in general. But that's actually that you just reminded me of I don't know if you ever watch CPAC by chance there, Duff, but I saw Ben Shapiro give a speech at CPAC, I guess recently, talking about all the events, and the speech he gave was basically a summarized version of his usual speeches. But the comment was, "Oh yeah, he's running for president." Like, no, but he gives a good. He's very good at saying, "Don't back down to, any opponent you have when it comes to, getting made fun of or the truth and that kind of thing." So, I don't know. I mean, do you think that the media is working better this time, or do you think that it's still everyone hears "I hate Trump" and they're kind of ignoring the "oh, this is a tragedy, ban guns," or I guess or maybe that's how I just took it.
Well, I'm not sure because once again, I'm looking at it from an outsider's perspective, and it's not something which I follow extremely closely. I can see the fallout, and I can see why people would take the extreme position that you say, okay, problem with guns, take away all the guns. And in fact, have you ever heard of the comedian Jim Jeffries?
Yes, he's a very funny guy. I like him. I like him a lot.
Okay, he does the whole thing where he's like, we had our equivalent of Sandy Hook, and they took away all the guns, and now there's no gun problems. But the problem is that's a lie. In fact, when it comes to gun-related crime, the number of guns in a country is only loosely correlated with the amount of gun crime that goes on. In fact, they're not the only two variables which come into play. Things like education, awareness, training, things like socioeconomic status and stuff like that all play into the likelihood of higher gun violence, not just the number of guns. So when people go, well, let's get rid of the guns, therefore no gun violence, it's like, well, the UK, Australia, have both tried to take away all the guns, and what they saw was an immediate spike in armed robbery because, of course, the people who had not legally obtained their guns suddenly could run around and use them, and it wasn't a fair playing field. So it's not a one-solution-fits-all way of dealing with gun-related crime. And in fact, overall in the United States, from all the data I've seen, is gun crime is going down. And that's why places like CNN, when they're talking about gun-related crimes in schools, have to pull in things like suicides, misfires, and other stuff to justify their idea that it's not going down as fast as it should. So they're playing with faulty numbers to take a faulty to make a faulty argument, when what they should be doing is saying, hey, look, as odd as it might sound, school shootings are extremely rare. And what are some of the things which other states are doing that seem to prevent school shootings in terms of health and wellness programs, in terms of school security, that have nothing to do with taking away guns, but everything to do with educating kids, educating adults, and making it okay for kids to come out and go, look, this guy here, he's scaring us a lot. We've looked at his Instagram feed, and he posts a lot of weird stuff, and that there would be institutions in place to follow up on that and actually give that person or try and get that person into the type of help that they need. So that, I would argue, is the better the better road to hoe, as it were. That is not something that a victim of a horrible crime would want to advocate for, or at least not as that many of the ones that we've seen.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's the uh, no, it's just the whole thing is crazy. And actually, no, you said that that just reminded me of when I first heard about the story, I was watching the Ben Shapiro show, and he was discussing his security guards, and he even mentioned the story of him growing up in a Jewish school, and there were two, I guess, guards at his entrance to a Jewish school, and there was actually a shooter that drove up to the school and saw the guards and went away to another school with no guards, and that school had a massive attack. And he just made the point of guards need to be there, they need to do the jobs, they are a great deterrent, and I don't see why there is an issue with having that at the door, having a metal detector and those kind of things to mitigate at least the damage that can be done and that kind of stuff. So I don't think that's out of the question at all. I know people make the case of, oh, I don't want kids around guns, and great, then keep the officers, make sure they're well trained, make sure they know what they're doing, and that should be less of a problem. I mean, they're getting paid to protect the kids. I mean, they can not, share the gun with the kid. I mean, that's pretty easy to do, but the whole that's stupid. So I mean, I don't know. Would you agree? I mean, if you had properly trained security guards at every school, that's probably a good middle ground, maybe, right?
Yeah, well, what I would say, looking at it from the outside, is that perhaps the right jumps to gun-related solution to gun problems quicker than they ought to. Because when they're like, oh, we'll just arm teachers, and suddenly this won't be a problem anymore. And it's like, well, do you really want teachers to be given the responsibility of life or death over their students in bad situations? And I go, well, no. What I would say is this seems to be indicative of school systems that may have too many kids going to certain schools and that don't have enough specialized schools for people with, let's say, learning needs, learning disabilities, behavioral problems, which are separate but still inclusive of the regular school system. So let's say in the push to make sure that you're getting as much bang for your buck as you can, school systems in the States seem to be trying to get one building to do far too much with far too many different types of kids, and in doing so, serving none of them well. And therefore, maybe making an ideal environment for a school shooter to be developed and to crop up and not get the attention that they need or the help that they need, because there's literally thousands of other kids. But this idea that you just go and arm teachers and it's the solution, it's like, oh, I don't see that. I think what you want is someone who is a security guard, with air quotes around it, but a security guard who's also a social worker. So their job is actually to get to know kids, they facilitate after-school clubs, they're very much part of the school community, they're not separate. They do happen to have a firearm, sure, but they're not this security guard who you have to fear and who stands out front. No, they're actually embedded within the classroom. They're embedded within the school community, and therefore kids will feel more comfortable going to them and saying, hey, there's a problem with this kid here, and I would just like to let you know that. And that doesn't mean they pull out their gun immediately. It means that they actually take some steps, some actions, and if something terrible were to happen, as the last resort, they have a firearm. So that's sort of my take on it.
Yeah, that is fair. I think definitely. If I'm yelling, I'm sorry. My air just kicked on, which is awesome. um, but yeah, I think that's. I mean, the last thing I'm gonna say of this whole thing is it's tragic that it happened. We wish the families of the shooting, we give them our deepest condolences and our thoughts and prayers are with them, and hopefully we can do or discuss this and get something have decent talk about this and not just kind of yell and scream and moan about how awful life is, because that doesn't solve problems. But hopefully we can come together and and actually have some substantive talk about regulations and the pros and cons of stuff. But right now, it seems like there is too much yelling, and unfortunately, that's just the way things will be until, and I don't want to say the media, but I guess the media kind of gets off their soapbox and stops trying to become so uh, proud of themselves. But I mean, I guess until next time. But anyway, on to getting that depression out of the way. I want to make sure we got that done first. That way we didn't have to keep, or didn't want to end on that. But something on a more happy note, I wanted to move on to uh, a movie because that's a lot happier, more or less. I have seen the reviews. I have not seen the movie myself, but let me know, Duff. What did you think? And probably no spoilers. Hopefully, you've what's your take on the Black Panther?
Well, first off, I have not seen the movie. I have read the synopsis. And from what I understand, it's kind of like Wonder Woman in that people who are ideologically motivated have tried to make the movie more than what it is. Black Panther's a tricky superhero because of his backstory and what he represents. So, what do you know about Black Panther there, AAA?
Most of what I know is some of it's from the comics, and I don't. I mean, the comics and the movies are not going to be the same. That's fair. I liked him in Civil War. Thought he had a good uh, intro, a good reason to do what he did, and looking at the trailer, it seemed like an entertaining movie, and I do look forward to seeing. I think it could be a fun movie to watch, but it's kind of like I guess it has the what's the word for it? It has the stage and the same environment of Guardians where he's not as well known, so it's they have a bit more leeway to kind of not screw things up. But if it's not quite like what I'm expecting, I won't have that baggage on me necessarily like DC has with all their superheroes. So as Guardians was so unknown that it had a lot of room to grow. So they've got that going for them. Storyline wise, I've heard he kind of has to go from one character and he develops and learns as he goes along, and he becomes kind of a new one. But yeah, I saw the reviews on Rotten Tomatoes where it was the best movie ever, and I'm like, okay, cool. And again, I've heard it's a decent movie, but at the same time, I don't think that there are very few movies that are going to get 90s, in my opinion. So I mean, I look forward to seeing it, but like, let's the downside is going to be watching the movie and saying, hey, this is an amazing movie, and then you watch it and go, oh, it was okay. So if it's okay, and I thought it was amazing, does that make the movie worse now? That's kind of my bigger fear. I guess does that make sense to you, Duff? Or
Yeah, like I'm definitely going to go and see it. But what I always found kind of interesting since they said that they were going to release it is that a lot of people jumped on this is really going to help bring Black communities together. This is a Black superhero. This is someone who they can feel good about in the same way that other Americans might feel really good about Captain America. All of which is possibly true. But the great irony in all this is that Black Panther is nothing like what they want him to be. In this canon, he is the guardian of Wakanda, and his entire job is to keep other people out. He's a judge and jury and executioner, and if someone sneaks into Wakanda, he's supposed to kill them. And what was always very neat about the story arcs with him is when he's out and about being an Avenger, trying to save the world, people go, oh, this is great. Are you going to bring Wakanda into the world? And he goes, no. It's like, Wakanda is Wakanda. It is for Wakandans. And do not come to my country uninvited or unannounced. Otherwise, you'll be my enemy. And this ultimately leads to the breakup of Storm and the Black Panther in the comic book arc, that and the Return of the Phoenix. But for Storm, she had to make the decision about whether or not she could stay married to someone who essentially would kill someone without asking, whether they were innocent or guilty if they happened to try and sneak into Wakanda or steal Wakandan property. And she couldn't really live with that. And that's what makes him such a unique anti-hero. For as much as T'Challa is trying to modernize his people's take on the rest of the world, he's still very much a conservative who believes in the traditions of his people. So he's not this touchy-feely nice guy that a lot of the people on the left are trying to make him out to be. And he's not actually that pro-African in the way that some other black superheroes might be, like Steel and others from the DC universe. So it's weird that they're hanging so much on this particular character.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, finally they've got the one hero to rule them all, because he is finally the superhero that they needed forever, and obviously come to believe that he's, I don't want to use the phrase, but I guess somewhat Trump-like, kind of, in that regard, but, again, I look forward to watching the movie. I think it'd be pretty good. Mr. Shapiro gave it a pretty good rating, so I look forward to the end result, and I hope that they don't blow it out of the water proportion more than they've already done, but we'll see how it goes, and I'm sure I'll have more spoilers once I see the movie. I know there'll be a spoiler warning, but we'll see how it goes. So that's good. But anyway, I wanted to lighten up the mood a bit more. Speaking of other, I guess more fun things, there is of course going on right now, which I have not really seen much of. I saw a few activities at dinner last night with my friends, but the Winter Olympics are going on right now, and there have been some. Several countries, North Korea being one of them, doing some cheers or something. And I heard about this a bit more, but of course, Duff, I know you mentioned this before about the cheerleader sex slave, I guess. And honestly, I don't really know much about this one. So I guess if you want to enlighten myself and our viewers about this story.
Oh, well, let's talk about a couple of things leading into that. So
Sure.
the Olympics in South Korea have been a resounding success for the most part. No major problems happening. It's been a sad Olympics for Canada in that we didn't win gold in either hockey game, the men's or the women's, and we didn't end up winning gold in curling either. So very tragic days for Canada. However, for the first time in I think the last 6 Olympics, we actually have more medals than the United States. So things to be happy about. Norway is shellacking everybody with a total of 38 medals. But to get into more of the political angle, week before last, much was made of Kim Jong-un's sister being in town and being there for the opening ceremonies. And wasn't she a great ambassador for the North Korean people? And that bad Mike Pence wouldn't even sit with her because he's so evil and racist and all this other stuff. The really sadistic thing, though, is that she is the minister of propaganda for North Korea. So she's literally the one that's in charge of brainwashing everybody. But a contingent of North Korean cheerleaders who were brought by the North Korean delegation to the event, we've been finding out more and more about them. And there was a news story posted by a former North Korean defector whose name is Lee So-yeon, who was talked about how those cheerleaders are very much treated as sex slaves and property of the party's elite. So they pick very good-looking young women, get them to do things in mass, and then oftentimes ask them back to their rooms after the fact. So even these girls who are there to spread North Korean cheer and to try and humanize North Korea are probably the victims of sexual crimes and sexual assault. So as much as people have tried to make North Korea into some sort of wunderkind, a communist utopia, the dark shadow of everything that's involved with that nation continues to pierce the veneer of civility which CNN and others want to give it. And it's truly tragic that we haven't had a more authentic and more nuanced look at North Koreans participating in these Olympics and the realities of what they're going to be going home to after the Olympics are done.
That is terrifying. I'm sorry. So you said she was the woman who reported this was a I guess she escaped North Korea and she just kind of what they got her on to talk about the Olympics kind of their thing. Is that what happened?
Yeah. So this woman, as I say, Lee So-hyun, was a member of the Central Politburo and a military musician, but she managed to escape North Korea in 2008. And so she's been living in South Korea since then, and she's been talking about what has been done to these poor women, and the things which they are not allowed to talk about. And for as big as the whole Me Too movement has been, for CNN to be uncritical of the presence of these cheerleaders, knowing what they know, is completely hypocritical of them. So it's like, we support hashtag Me Too, but only when it's not the pretty hand-picked cheerleaders of a communist dictatorship. Then they can do whatever they want. That's not our concern.
Wow, that's okay. Well, I mean, I really want to say one of these days that hey, that's surprising. I really can't. Unfortunately, they've obviously shown their true colors about what they are willing and willing not to do, and of course, the media is in love with them, and oh, this is just amazing. She's there, and they're doing this stuff, and then of course, oh, that racist America. How can you guys live with yourself and not allowing all this racism and blah 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 and stuff. So it's the I'm hoping these kinds of events and things could just prove more to everyone or to the Americans in general that hey, there's a bit of bias going on, just a little bit, just a teensy weensy amount, little bias there. So
Yeah,
that
and
is terrible.
yeah, and this is just where, unfortunately, the news media um, is very much not the place where you will go to find unbiased, unideologically tainted information. And like, it's just horrifying the degree to which every story has been shaped, and how everything we see has been edited to such a degree that it may not reflect reality in any way, shape, or form. And they're totally okay with that. In fact, they're more okay with that than letting us know the information about what actually happened and letting us draw our own conclusions. Um, and so, you get into this town hall thing, which happened with the shootings in Florida and how staged that was. You get into any sort of actual discussion, and you realize that even the conservative representative on those discussion panels has been selected for a particular purpose. Um, and I guess if we're going to pull Jordan Peterson into this, he had that interview recently with Vice, where they released their cut of the interview and basically made Jordan Peterson look like a bit of a jerk. And then they released the long version of the interview, and it's like, wait a second, they edited this to such a degree that they made something out of something which wasn't there. So that's really quite horrifying.
Yeah, I'm not. Well, I guess with that, have you seen the? I might have asked you this before. Have you seen the full interview actually, or no?
I haven't seen the full extended cut. I saw the full Vice interview.
Okay, yeah, it was not done. Again, if you see the Vice's version, he comes off as a bit of a jerk. If you see the extended version of it, there are a few times where he says, you know, this is not the most fun conversation to have, and I get where you're coming from, and I'm not trying to say you're wrong, but we just, I don't think that there's a strict yes or no answer to some of these things, and people should just understand that when they do. For anyone who doesn't know, the interview was talking about how women dress in the workplace and how they associate with men, and Jordan Peterson was discussing what's not, what to wear, how to act, that kind of thing. And so the Vice guy said, "Hey, why can't women do this?" And Jordan Peterson, "But I don't know the rules, and if you don't know the rules, it's hard to argue. Hey, you're doing this thing for this reason because we don't know. We're not always on the same page as the next guy around us. So I mean, maybe you have great intentions, maybe you don't, but we don't know how we're going to come off to another person. So we have to be careful." And it was basically, he said, "I don't know. We need to be mindful of everyone else," and that was kind of Mr. Peterson's point. And the interviewer kind of said, "Oh well, you're against blah blah," and it was, it came off as a negative interview. But like I said, there were scenes where he said, "Hey, you know what? I'm not against what you're saying, but we need to know more. And that's what he meant to say. And of course, Vice had their spin on it. So, but luckily, if you're a fan of Mr. Peterson's, then you can easily tell. It's fairly obvious when he's when he is heated. It is very appropriate, I guess, is what I'm trying to say there. So it's a thing to do, but I mean, he does a million interviews nowadays, so it's not like that's anything new. And hopefully, he does a few more. And by the way, he's not told me to do this, but go read his book, 12 Rules to Life. It's apparently amazing. I still need to go and get that myself, but yeah, it'd be good. And actually, Duff, you said you've gotten that book already too, right?
Oh yeah, no, read it, finished it, and highly recommend it. We'll have to do a book review one of these days, there, AAA.
Yes, I'm not to put any pressure on her, but I'm hoping that we can all get together, get roaming again. Of course, now she's a big superstar and doesn't need to have us mere mortals going and spamming her email box trying to get her an interview again. But the email has been sent, so hopefully we can get her down and talking with her. I don't. I imagine she is having a million things done. I know she's been kind of under the weather recently, but doing well. And I think she came up with a video on YouTube recently. She's been doing quite a few uh, content, a lot of content on TV. But I guess speaking of which, have you seen anything roaming related recently there, Duff?
Yeah, I watched her most recent YouTube release of her Uncensored show, which is basically a news wrap up, and she actually talked about her take on Black Panther. She liked it, but apparently not a big fan of the soundtrack. But I have to admit, being super jealous, super jealous. So she got a signed copy, first edition of Jordan Peterson's book. And if you want to take a look at that, she has it posted over on her Instagram. But I'm like, oh, I would love that signature.
That's very true. Well, you know what, Duff, when this takes off, when we become bigger roaming millennial, get to roaming millennial heights, I'm sure you can go and get a signed copy and maybe even a note footheader or something of those lines in Mr. Peterson's next book directly to you. So we'll have to. That'll be the next goal we have. But yeah, hopefully we can. I'll get the book, read the book, do a book review with roaming, and that'll be all fun to go. But actually, the one thing I know we talked about before as well, and again, I don't. This is a Canadian thing, so I know less about this. But you mentioned Trudeau in India and stuff happened there. So I guess I don't know really about this. So you can take it away and what happened in this situation.
Well, oh God, the glorious King of Canada decided to go and reverse culturally appropriate traditional Indian clothing on his tour through India. So for the last week and a bit, Justin Trudeau and his family have been in India trying to make connections between their government and ours, and trying to get close to Modi, the prime minister there. But along the way, he has been dressing pretty outrageously, and he has been a bit of a hypocrite, because if someone were to show up at, let's say, a Aboriginal band meeting in Canada, wearing a ceremonial headdress and traditional Aboriginal clothing, he would be outraged. Like, oh my God, how dare you go in there and do that? You know how culturally insensitive that is, and it totally would be. But then he goes to India and he dresses in the most Bollywood of Bollywood fashions and expects to be taken seriously. And we're just sort of sitting there going, why, Justin? Like, you can't even live out your own principles, and you can't even figure out ahead of time when you're violating them. And you're trying to impress the Prime Minister of India with this kind of behavior. And there's sort of a sub-story in that in the 1980s, there were Indian Canadians who were involved in the planning of a terrorist attack on a transatlantic flight. They planted a bomb and killed many people. And one of them, he decided to take along as part of his envoy to India. So essentially, he brought a terrorist to India, or an alleged terrorist to India, to try and garner support for Canada by going there. So all the Canadians are watching this and going, you're very pretty, but you're not much else.
Wow. I'm guessing that's not a giant shock to you.
Not really, no. And the more we get into the story, the seedier it becomes, because it turns out the members of India's opposition party were the ones who floated the idea that he should bring this former terrorist, allegedly, along with him. So just going to India, they got trapped in Indian political games that they should have seen coming a mile away, yet they didn't. And so our pretty prime minister, once again, has proven that he's pretty bad at politicking.
Right. Well,
I'm not bitter, right? I'm
yeah.
not coming across as bitter at all, right?
Very special. Well, I can't say that I'm at all surprised about this development. um, but yeah, that is wow. Okay, I'm surprised, but I'm not. I guess I'm surprised that it happened, but I mean, I'm not surprised that it happened. I guess is the best reaction. Wow, he is uh I guess he tried and failed miserably. So what else is new potentially? But anyway, so on good. I'm glad that happened. I guess. But now with on actually the opposite note, there some less than some not crazy news, I guess. Since we can go back, I wanted to mention. I don't know how much you know about this, but I've heard recently that our great investigator, Mr. Mueller, has indicted a few people regarding the Trump-Russia debacle, and well, they're not Trump or really connected to Trump. He wanted to indict a bunch of Russians, which good. Um, and that's so. Hopefully, he has proven that he's used resources in the White House correctly, and he's doing something. But that's we're still not really closer to anything about shaking our head at Mr. Trump for colluding. We're still on the same page of yeah, Russians could have been involved, but we don't have much proof that Trump was with them, and it's still it's still surprising that after a year of all this, nothing has happened, and we're still saying, oh well, you know what? It's like everything else. It hasn't happened yet. But I don't know. Have you heard much about the that whole investigation? Those news articles there, Jeff?
Actually, I have read into some of that, and it's one of those instances that is utterly frustrating because people forget the Mueller investigation was actually started by Trump's Justice Department because they thought that there might be some things worth looking into. So even though there's been animosity between Trump and the investigation, it was his Justice Department that started it. So the idea that Trump is somehow not okay with this and that Mueller and Trump are fighting one another continuously, I think is just so much hooey. What we see here is that a FBI investigation that has had its own problems, especially considering the political bias of some of its members who, to Mueller's credit, were removed from the investigation when that was made public, has been researching, looking into, and identifying people who might have colluded with Russia in one way or another that breaks American law, or at least looks somewhat suspicious. That he hasn't managed to rope the president in this, who cares? That's not actually his mandate. His mandate is to explore Russian collusion in the electoral process leading up to the election of 2000 and was it 2016 now? Or was it 2017?
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. And, hand it to Mueller. He seems to have done it, and he doesn't seem to be particularly partisan. And he seems to have shedded an awful lot more light on things, which the left-leaning media actually hates because they're not getting anything that they can use, and what they think they can use tends to evaporate under their feet the next day. So as odd as it might sound, Mueller's doing a good job. Like, more power to him.
Yeah, I think. Well, I don't know. Do you think in this situation there, Duff? Do you think that this proves that there was something going on, but Trump really didn't do much, and we can see that he's not. I don't think people would tell Trump secrets given his Twitter account. So I don't know. Is this maybe a good uh, chapter in? All right, guys, we found out some news and we were proven wrong. Can we stop saying it Trump is wrong, or is this a we're going to go down fighting until I guess we're hoarse, or I don't know if we're hoarse now, but do you think that this means that there's an end, or this proves there's just still no end to the it's all bad Trump?
Um, well, actually, I'd be more curious about understanding the limitations of a special prosecutor. Uh, just because I don't think they're allowed to be in existence perpetually, and they have to submit evidence showing that their investigation is still ongoing and important. So when Mueller decides to call it quits, that's when we know that one, they've run out of information, they've run out of things to pursue. The idea that people who are involved with political campaigns, who are also business people having interests with companies and with governments outside of the United States, is nothing new. And it never will be, it never won't be the case that there are external factors at play within the lead up to an election or the election itself, but rather you want to have fail safes in place to catch them. And as far as we've been able to tell, the FBI and other agencies have actually managed to do a pretty good job of preventing electoral fraud. Special Counsel Mueller has found some irregularities, but if he had been given the same purview over the Clinton campaign, I'm sure they would have found many, many more. And so this is yet another example of the mechanisms in place to prevent tampering actually working to a fair degree, but also an example of how the media, in not getting the news that they want, are hell-bent on creating news, even fake news, to justify their position.
Yeah, that's well, I don't know. Is that the I guess this might even be by them since he's not blaming Trump. Do you think that they could even spin this as, oh well, yeah, there still could be some stuff, and this could also be fake news? Or do you think they'd still spin it as though, all right, Russians, we're just waiting for the Trump part of it to come out, if that makes sense?
Oh yeah, well they'll keep on waiting and waiting, even if the Mueller investigation closes. If it closes and they haven't found anything about Trump, they'll be like, Trump paid off Mueller. We should have a special investigator into the special investigator. So they won't let it go, just because there's too much political capital to keep on pursuing this, even though it's ridiculous. It's kind of like how Trump was doubling down on Obama wasn't actually born in the States. He's not an American citizen. Should he have kept it alive for as long as he did? Probably not. And this is what will end up being the case for the Russia investigation. It's like, we're going to keep it alive for as long as Trump's in office. And it's just like, well, you would hope you can move on to better and more substantial things, because in truth, I want the media to be holding everybody accountable, especially if there is malfeasance or wrongdoing. That's part of their job. The system only works if we can be honest about going after people for things which they have done. And if the media's pet project is to persecute one side to the exclusion of the other, then they're not actually doing their job. And they need some checks and balances on them to ensure that they're trying to be in the business of portraying the news in an unbiased and critically minded sort of way, but not in a partisan sort of way. But I don't think that'll ever happen either.
Well, I guess in your mind, who would be a good check to the media, if that makes sense?
Alt media. Yeah, no, alternative media has served as a really good check to the media as a whole. And the funny thing is that there's going to be a section of the alt media which is critical of the alt media, and that's a good thing too. Just so long as there are viable alternative means of obtaining the news, then we're in good stead. What I'd like to see, though, is less of a stranglehold, especially in the United States, but even here in Canada, of the major news networks, so that more voices could be accessed more easily, and they're not all on the same payroll.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Why? kind of wish that. Well, I don't know. I guess with that being the case, I mean, do you think that? And again, I don't know how it works in Canada, but I mean, I know that there are a lot of sneaky things that the like CNN, those kind of companies do to uh, make sure that no matter what you do, um, they get your money basically. So even if you say I hate cable, they kind of still stick with that kind of thing. But I guess I don't know, and hopefully there are several alternate media things in Canada. But I mean, do you think that now is the era of alternate media, and then people really aren't watching mainstream media anymore?
To a degree. I don't have the numbers to back that up, but here in Canada, our national news media kind of has a monopoly on things. So we have CBC, we have a thing called CTV, and then we have local news networks. But in reality, most of them are owned by similar companies, and our national news network is, of course, funded majorly by our government. So we probably need more alternative news sources than we have. The problem is there just aren't enough of us, and we don't have deep enough pockets to make them keep going. We've also had sort of failed attempts at alternate news, like Rebel Media. But even Rebel Media got sucked into covering more news from the United States than from Canada, just because there isn't really the market here for that sort of thing. So the whole CRTV experiment, which Roaming Millennial and Crowder and others are a part of, it requires a certain number of people to fund it. And here in Canada, we wouldn't be able to do that along political or ideological lines to the same degree in order to provide a counterbalance to the main media narrative.
Gotcha. And I guess not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but would you say that there are uh, several and or a growing number of alternative voices in Canada?
Actually, we've seen a contraction in them. As I said, Rebel Media kind of went the way of the dodo bird. Lauren Southern, who was sort of an alternate news source, has become, I think, identitarian. I'm not sure. I haven't followed her enough recently. But then we have people like Faith Goldie, who's kind of in that same boat, where we're kind of like, are they really talking about Canadian news? Are they more interested in American news because they can get a bigger audience from the States than they can here? So I can't really point to too many commentators who are based here in Canada that actually deal with Canadian-based content, just because it's not financially viable.
Yeah, I guess that's true. That's I guess that's really unfortunate there too. But well, I don't know. With that being the case, would you, if you had the means to do so, would you come to the States?
I don't know. I don't know. I like Canada, and it's funny. A couple years back, during YouTube Week on Dave Rubin's channel, he had Armored Skeptic on, and Armored Skeptic was trying to talk about the differences between what it's like here in Canada and what's it like here in the States. And as much as I like Gregory, I didn't think he did a good job of illustrating what these differences are and why it's under the Constitution than they do here, and less direct taxation from the government. But you know, here in Canada, we have values that are situated around being tied to the British system, British common law. We have values based around the idea that here in Canada, we can all kind of get along, and so far we've been able to do that. And that we believe in a charter of rights and freedoms, which is more specific, but maybe less broad than the American Constitution in terms of what it allocates to people. Because we have protected speech, we don't have free speech. But we also have things like healthcare, which, although some people call it universal and free, it's not. But we get pretty good bang for our buck comparatively to other healthcare systems, and we can even compete with some private healthcare systems in terms of what the average citizen is entitled to on a provincial level. So there's a lot of good things here that keep people here. But at the same time, there's a lot of things which we maybe aren't critical enough about, that we should be more critical of.
Anything in particular you're thinking of, or?
Let's say role of government in regulating aspects of society. Let's say provincial favoritism that's built into our constitution. So Quebec actually has special privileges which are not extended to other provinces in Canada. The Maritimes have special privileges which are not extended to other provinces in Canada. So there is, in effect, preferential treatment built into our Constitution. And that's something which I think we need to get rid of and approach in a more direct way. But I also think we need to mount a more robust intellectual defense of what Canada has and has not done historically, because a lot of American groups, particularly groups like Black Lives Matter and whatnot, have tried to set up here in Canada using American wrongdoings, or at least American political instances, to try and justify themselves. And it's like, but we shouldn't give two bleeps about what happened in the States. Your critiques of Canada should be Canadian based. And if they're not, get out of our country, kind of thing.
Interesting. Well, I think, yeah, I can see the pros and cons to that kind of stuff. I mean, you know what? Again, hopefully you do come by, and I don't know. Have you been able to visit the States very often, really, or you mostly just been in?
I haven't actually visited the States. I've been in U.S. airspace, but I have not landed.
I see. Well, hey, you know what? You're more than welcome to come visit me when you want to sometime when your schedule. I'm sorry, when you invent time and stuff, you are more than welcome to come over to me and hang out in my very lonely one single apartment here and hang out and do some stuff. We will go and sit on one chair and have one meal because it's what I can afford on my great job right now. But that'll be a great adventure there too. Anyway, no, that sounds good. And hey, Duff, I appreciate you coming on. I think we've talked about quite a bit tonight, and I wanted to make sure we ended on a better note. And it sounds like we did. Sounds like we have covered everything we needed to, and I think the hopefully there will be, I look forward to the next Justin Trudeau wears a red hair and dressed like a chicken next week. Something will happen. I'm sure like that. So we just look forward to the news of him wearing lip gloss, or I don't know, something Lady Gaga costume going on there. I'm sure will take place. Anyway, that's about all the time we have tonight. But YouTube, thank you for listening and watching to us. And any last thoughts there, Duff?
Oh, not too many. How about you there, AAA?
Like I said, hopefully, we started off with a rather tragic event. Hopefully that gets better. And right now, it's looking like we are making steps in the right direction, so we can hopefully continue that way. And as Mr. Shapiro said, he commented in CPAC that the age of political correctness is dying slowly. Hopefully it never comes back, but, more knowledge is always better, and don't freak out. And as he always says, look at the facts, not the feelings. We'll continue on. But anyway, guys, thank you for listening, and we will see you guys next week. So say goodbye, Duff.
Have a good one, ladies and gentlemen.
We will see you guys next time. Thank you so much.